Welcome, fellow educators and caregivers, to this explainer detailing the complex social-emotional journey of children and teens. Today, we're taking essential learning outcomes and key terms from developmental research and transforming them into a comprehensive, actionable lesson you can actually use. Whether you're standing at the front of a classroom or navigating the wild ride of parenting, understanding how young minds develop their sense of self and how they relate to others is absolutely crucial. We're going to unpack exactly how that rapidly expanding world presents both unique challenges and incredible opportunities for growth. Let's dive right in. To keep things structured, our agenda today follows a clear three-part arc. 1. The internal world. 2. The external world. And 3. The adult's toolkit. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the internal world, developing self and identity. As a child grows and their world expands way beyond their immediate family, you really have to wonder, how do they actually figure out who they are? How do they define themselves when they're suddenly surrounded by so many new faces, new peers, and new expectations? Well, it all starts with what we call the domains of self-definition. Children don't just look in the mirror and think of themselves as universally good or bad. It's way more complex than that. Instead, they build this sort of multifaceted mental dashboard. They start categorizing their physical traits, their intelligence, their social skills, and their self-regulation. They look around, they constantly compare themselves to their peers, and they begin mapping out their very specific strengths and shortcomings. And this brings us right to Erik Erikson's foundational concept, industry versus inferiority. During these school-age years, kids have this incredibly powerful drive to work hard and become competent, capable members of society. But here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. That deep desire is really fragile. If a child studies hard for a test and gets mocked, or maybe tries to help out and is just dismissed, that drive can instantly flip into painful feelings of inferiority. Their entire self-concept really hinges on this delicate sense of achievement. Then, as we move into adolescence, the goalposts completely shift. Welcome to Erikson's fifth stage, identity versus role confusion. From about age 13 onward, teens are intensely focused on one massive question: who am I? They aren't just trying to be difficult or push your buttons. They're actively testing out different values, beliefs, and personal goals. They're basically striving to build a cohesive identity so they don't get entirely lost in role confusion. Moving right along, we hit Section 2, the external world. Peers, morals, and stress. Okay, now that we've got a handle on the internal self, we need to analyze how these growing kids interact with the broader society around them. As relationships evolve, a child starts forming what's known as a goal-corrected partnership with adults. Think of it kind of like a negotiation. Both parties are compromising to reach a common goal. It sounds like, hey, I'll finish my homework if I can have some extra screen time. But remember, beneath all this newly found independence, they still heavily rely on psychological security. They desperately need that comforting baseline that you've got their back if things go wrong. And as their peer networks expand, kids often encounter what sociologists refer to as gender schools. Now, these aren't actual physical buildings. They're invisible, same-sex peer groups that intensely enforce what it means to be masculine or feminine. The rules are unwritten, sure, but they are incredibly strict. And deviating from those rules, well, that's often met with intense stereotyping pressure, which makes this a major hurdle for a developing child's self-esteem. Naturally, this social evolution directly impacts their moral compass. If we look through the lenses of developmental psychologists Piaget and Kohlberg, we can actually track a very clear progression in moral reasoning. It shifts from a highly egocentric mindset, where it's all about just avoiding punishment, to a deeper consideration for mutual consent. Eventually, they begin to understand their duty to maintain social order. They start judging actions by the intents behind them, not just the physical damage that was caused. As their conscience grows, so does their emotional complexity. One of our key learning outcomes today is distinguishing between two very different reactions to making a mistake. First, there's guilt. Guilt is healthy. It's an empathy-based remorse that essentially says, I did a bad thing. Scapegoating, on the other hand, is highly defensive. It's an indirect expression of anger that says, you made me do a bad thing. Recognizing this difference is literally a game changer when we're trying to guide them toward healthy accountability. Of course, this expanding external world inevitably introduces a heavy cognitive load. As educators and caregivers, we are the absolute frontline for spotting the warning signs of stress. You've got to look out for behavioral shifts like sudden overreactions or aggression. Watch for physiological signs like unexplained headaches or stomach aches, or social shifts like suddenly withdrawing from friends. These aren't just kids acting out. These are the blaring alarms of a nervous system that is under serious pressure. To help synthesize all these massive shifts, it really helps to track the progression of key milestones. At ages 6 to 7, it's pretty much all about same-gender friends. But by 8 to 9, that inner critic really wakes up, bringing some intense competitiveness. Preteens? Well, they start getting their feelings hurt a lot more easily. And then the teen years shift heavily into body image and romance. It all finally culminates around ages 16 to 18, where they emerge with a much stronger sense of self, often prioritizing their friends over their family. This brings us to Section 3, the Adult's Toolkit, Meeting Social Emotional Needs. All right, we're now pivoting from just understanding the child to actually outlining some actionable strategies. According to Ellen Galinsky's Stages of Parenthood, adults absolutely must adapt alongside the child. During the school-age interpretive stage, you're highly involved. You're constantly modeling values and attitudes. But as they become teens, you enter the interdependent stage. Your role shifts from being a director to more of a consultant. It's a delicate dance of complex negotiation, trying to balance their desperate need for freedom with the boundaries that actually keep them safe. So, how do we help a child develop that vital sense of industry we talked about earlier? Caregivers and teachers should really view these supportive behaviors as a daily checklist. We need to practice active listening, set firm but fair boundaries, and consistently show unconditional love. By consciously guiding kids to focus on their unique abilities rather than zeroing in on their faults, we provide them with the armor they need to fight off those feelings of inferiority. We also have to respect the immense power of peers. The society of children is really the ultimate training ground for independence. Because these peer groups are just so incredibly crucial, adults have to intentionally make time and space for friendships to flourish. Our job here isn't to micromanage that every single interaction, but rather to act as a safety net. We need to actively help them learn how to resolve their own conflicts in healthy ways. Finally, big feelings are going to arise. It's practically a guarantee. When the inevitable meltdowns happen, use this 4-step sequence to empower your students. First, you must model emotional control yourself. You have to be their calm in the storm. Second, normalize their feelings so they don't feel like something is broken inside them. Third, use loving, respectful discipline. And fourth, suggest indirect outlets, things like running, art, or journaling, to help them safely regulate all that intense emotional energy. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. Knowledge is really only as powerful as its application. So take a look around the specific environment you create for your kids or your students. What indirect outlets could you introduce today to help them safely process their stress? How are you going to adapt your toolkit to meet them exactly where they are? Take the learning outcomes and key terms from this lesson and use them to foster a more resilient, self-aware generation. Thanks so much for joining me.